Grim Reaper, this is Range 1, over.
It was the mission that would change the face of warfare. The CIA's top-secret infiltration of one of the most dangerous regions on the planet.
This was unprecedented in the history of the CIA and the history of American warfare.
A rapid response team from the CIA will slip into Afghanistan and covertly build the foundation for war. And this isn't business as usual. It's personal.
He sat me down and said, listen, I want you to kill bin Laden when you find him. I want you to cut his head off and bring it back to the president.
Now, a small band of CIA officers will brave terrible odds and a brutal landscape in order to crush Al-Qaeda, destroy the Taliban, and find and kill the man responsible for the attacks of September 11th. Codename Operation Jawbreaker. September 26th, 2001. 14,000 feet above the Hindu Kush, an unmarked helicopter carries a covert team into a dangerous land. Afghanistan. A punishing landscape teeming with heavily armed rival factions. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires.
Afghanistan's a hostile, harsh environment. It is brutally hot in some of these places in the summertime. In the wintertime, it is cold, it is harsh, it is an unforgiving place.
The British Empire and the Soviet Union each tried to conquer this untamed land. Both were sent home in defeat. Now, a team of 7 CIA operatives are about to lay the groundwork for a new kind of war. A war of intelligence.
Intelligence is the key to this. And almost all of those officers had come out of the U.S. military, in most cases special forces, and had worked within the CIA, blending their paramilitary skills with intelligence and covert action.
The team is codenamed Jawbreaker. Their mission? To take out Afghanistan's oppressive Taliban regime, destroy Al-Qaeda, and find the most wanted man in the world, Osama bin Laden.
They sat me down and said, listen, I want you to kill bin Laden when you find him. I want you to cut his head off and bring it back to the president. I said, fine, I got that.
Only 15 days earlier, Osama bin Laden had launched his attacks of September 11th, which took out 4 passenger planes, leveled the World Trade Center, and left the Pentagon in flames.
I was watching it on television at the time, and I had high suspicions it was an Al-Qaeda attack, given the information that we had collected over the years. But once I saw the second plane hit, I knew immediately it was Al-Qaeda.
Now, the Jawbreaker team is boots down in Afghanistan, in the Panjshir Valley. The job of tracking down the man responsible for the 9/11 attacks falls to these men. From the only organization with the manpower and skills to do the job, the CIA. The job of the United States Central Intelligence Agency is to collect information, raw intel about governments, organizations, or individuals that might pose a danger to the United States. A vast network of operatives around the globe risk their lives to penetrate the highest levels of foreign governments and to recruit local informants. At headquarters in Langley, Virginia, CIA analysts scrutinize incoming intelligence reports to provide the president with the most accurate and up-to-date intel.
The CIA is focused really on intelligence collection and then all source analysis to provide the policymakers, the President of the United States, the best intelligence possible.
CIA, the Director of Operations, does two things. It conducts what we call the FI mission, Foreign Intelligence Mission, that's collecting intelligence, and then it does covert action. Covert action is the taking of any step that the U.S. government wants to conceal. So if you want to conceal support to some local security forces, they fight some terrorist organization, you want to do it secretly, CIA are the people that have a mandate to do that.
For years, the CIA has been watching bin Laden and his al-Qaeda network. But not everyone recognized the magnitude of the danger.
In the early 90s, you start to see a lot of these, what we called Afghan Arabs around the world. They're returning to countries like Algeria, they're going to the Philippines, and they're beginning terrorist organizations in these places and conducting violent acts, with bin Laden as the string that ties a lot of these people together.
In August of '98, the bombing of 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa put Osama bin Laden on the CIA's most wanted list. But still, the organization felt their hands were tied.
Bin Laden, of course, was very dangerous. If you look at the fatwas he had issued, even before the August '98 attacks on our embassies in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, he had stated his intent, he had demonstrated his intent. So we were acutely aware of the threat, but we did not have the resources or the clear authority to engage him with lethal force.
For 7 years, bin Laden has been raising an army of jihadists at his al-Qaeda training camps. Sheltered by the brutally repressive Taliban regime, which controls all but the north of Afghanistan.
We had a major problem with Afghanistan. We had a terrorist safe haven in Afghanistan. And given the fact that that terrorist element inside Afghanistan was dependent upon the support of the Taliban, it seemed to me that it was extremely important for us to penetrate the Taliban as thoroughly as we possibly could.
On 9/11, we had more than 100 sources throughout the various tribal entities within Afghanistan. And I immediately thought, how do we get into Afghanistan? How do we collect intelligence? How do we recruit allies? And how do we engage and kill the enemy?
On 9/11, bin Laden had brought his holy war from his base in Afghanistan to American soil. The attacks forever changed the game for the CIA. Now, the gloves are off.
Before 9/11, our role inside Afghanistan was collecting intelligence. Once 9/11 happened, simply collecting intelligence on the problem wasn't sufficient. We had to do something about it.
After 9/11, the president turned to the director of CIA and said, "You have the lead, execute." At that point, they called me and said, "You've been wanting to get into Afghanistan for these years past. Organize the teams, go."
September 13th, 2001. Crumpton begins assembling the first teams for the dangerous mission. Each will be led by a field officer with extensive experience in South Asia.
The team leaders we picked were just that. They were leaders. We didn't have time for them to come back and say, should I do this or should I do that? We expected them to make decisions, and they did.
Crumpton works with the SAD, the Special Activities Division of the CIA, which handles human intelligence operations in hostile territory. SAD officers are handpicked from the cream of the crop of the military's elite special forces. Within hours, they've assembled a team of 7 men that is tailor-made for the mission. The first team will go in to build alliances and lay the groundwork. Gary Burnson will follow them in to begin the war.
They were looking for language skills, native language skills, whether they speak Dari or Farsi or Pashtun or Arabic, and then hard military skills.
The teams that we deployed into Afghanistan after 9/11, really a combination of officers with paramilitary skills and officers with more traditional operational intelligence collection capabilities and language and cultural knowledge and experience in that particular area.
Once on the ground, the Jawbreaker team unloads the gear they'll need for survival in the cold, high-altitude environment. Alpine clothing and equipment, AK-47s, 9mm high-power automatic pistols, laptops, global positioning systems, and millions of dollars in cash for buying the support of local warlords, which they'll need for manpower and logistical support. As the CIA team builds the plan for war.
The CIA's mission, the team leaders going in, was to determine among this strata of tribal leaders, who could we bring to our side?
The Afghans are tribal. They don't get along with one another. And when they do cooperate, it's usually against foreign invaders. This is what makes it difficult. It's their territory, it's their ground. They know the ground very well, and they're prepared to fight on it.
The Jawbreaker team are now the only American forces in Afghanistan, and they're about to lay the groundwork for war. September 2001. The CIA's first Jawbreaker team arrives in the mountains of northern Afghanistan. In one of the fastest deployments in CIA history, the unit is on the ground only 15 days after the attacks of 9/11.
I believe they landed on 26 September. So just in a matter of days, we deployed the team. And this was unprecedented in the history of the CIA and the history of American warfare.
Dropped into the Panjshir Valley, the Jawbreaker team are the only American forces in Afghanistan. From the mountain peaks to the valley below, they're surrounded by Taliban and Al-Qaeda trenches.
You have just a handful of CIA operatives dropping in behind enemy lines, working with our Afghan allies. It was exceedingly dangerous.
The team's first mission is to build a reliable network of local allies and to gather intelligence about where Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces are positioned. For help, they turn to old allies from the Soviet invasion, a fragmented band of tribal groups called the Northern Alliance.
There was essentially a civil war that was taking place in Afghanistan at that time, and the Taliban was being opposed militarily by what was called at the time the Northern Alliance. And it was an organization that was mostly made up of ethnic minorities.
We had been working with the Northern Alliance for a number of years. We trained many of those individuals. We'd given them equipment. We had been doing an exchange of intelligence with them. We had a very close working relationship with the Northern Alliance. And so we were able to piggyback off of that relationship to conduct this mission.
Only weeks before, the Northern Alliance nearly crumbled when fundamentalists, disguised as journalists, assassinated the alliance's leader, Ahmad Shah Massoud. Massoud had been a key ally in the fight against the Soviet invasion in the 1980s. But once the Soviets went home in defeat, the United States left the Afghans to pick up the pieces on their own. This time, the Jawbreaker team has to convince the warlords the CIA is here for the long haul.
We had for many years a personal relationship with Ahmad Shah Massoud, who had just been killed a few days earlier. But we also knew a large number of the senior lieutenants of Ahmad Shah Massoud. So when we came in, it was like a long-lost friend. Oh, thank God, now you're here. Now you can help us to defeat our enemies.
The team starts by meeting with the Alliance's head of intelligence, Arif Sarwari. They put a down payment on Sarwari's cooperation, $500,000. In return, the Northern Alliance agrees to gather intelligence, observe Taliban and Al-Qaeda positions, and help map out the front line.
For the CIA team, first priority, of course, was to stay alive. Number two, how do you not only stay alive, but how do you define your allies and how do you bring them on board?
The team consults with local generals and warlords, offering huge payouts for logistical support. These men of the CIA, the storied institution of high-tech espionage and sleek spy gadgetry, are now in a cold, uncomfortable land, frozen in time. Housed in a remote Spartan compound, they depend on the Northern Alliance for everything, from intelligence to the bare essentials.
We'll rely on them for all sorts of things. They're going to explain to us the composition, the tribal composition, you know, who's in what village, who's in what town, who are the key players in this place, what other warlords have been cooperative or not as cooperative.
But these small teams, you know, dropped in behind enemy lines were so dependent on Afghan hosts to protect them, to feed them, to guide them into battle. So it was very much ad hoc, on the run, work with what you've got.
Since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan in 1996, the Northern Alliance has battled to hold on to the remote northeast of the country, centered around the Panjshir Valley. On the Shomali Plains below, a few thousand Northern Alliance fighters are facing off with a massive Taliban offensive.
There are two conventional armies facing each other in what looks like a World War I environment. There are trenches, there are defensive positions, there's armor, there's artillery. I mean, this is a traditional battlefield.
The Jawbreaker team sees the Taliban troop buildup on the plains as the prime target for a first round of U.S. bombs. But before the CIA can call in U.S. air power, they have to know where to drop the bombs. October 1st. Mission number 1 is to map the battlefield, and 2 men from the Jawbreaker team make the dangerous journey to the front. Hiding barely 600 yards from enemy soldiers, the team uses a global positioning system to record their coordinates.
You know, the Shomali Plains, the battlefield's like 35 miles long. This is no small task. You have a map. The Northern Alliance then takes a pencil or a pen and they mark what they think it is. Then our guys go down to the front, really close with the enemy, and they're marking those positions with a GPS to make sure that they've got it exactly correct so that we can differentiate, you know, friendly from foe.
The team travels along the front line, recording coordinates and mapping out targets. They move dangerously close to enemy trenches, sometimes too close. Back at the compound, the team sends GPS coordinates and intelligence cables back to Langley, advising immediate action. But military bureaucracy doesn't move as quickly as the CIA, and days go by without a single airstrike. With winter closing in, the team's Afghan allies begin to question just how serious the CIA is about taking out the Taliban.
We had promised the Afghans that we would be with them to help develop their country, going back to the Soviet invasion, and we lied to them. So when you ask a question about can we trust the Afghans are asking every day, can we trust the Americans to stay? Can we trust the Americans to protect us?
October 7th. Less than a month after 9/11, Washington informs the Jawbreaker team that the bombing campaign is about to begin. And finally, in the distance, the first explosion. It's much smaller than expected, but it's just the beginning. And bombs aren't the only things falling from the sky. Under cover of night, the first troops from U.S. Special Forces drop into Afghanistan. The CIA's war is about to begin. U.S. Special Forces sends in their first A-team. 555, triple nickel. The addition of military special ops gives the small CIA teams a huge advantage over the Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters on the plains.
CIA had intelligence, we had experience on the ground, we had linguistic ability, and the Special Forces teams brought a level of firepower and logistical capability that was a perfect marriage.
The head of the Jawbreaker team in the Panjshir Valley has just turned 60 and now faces mandatory retirement. Coming in on the heels of Special Forces is the man who will replace him, Gary Burnson. Against usual protocol, the commander of the war effort, Hank Crumpton, accompanies Berntsen on the hazardous journey.
You had some terrific mountains, a high altitude. Some of the helicopters, in fact, were straining. At one point, we had to dump fuel for about 20 minutes because we were just too heavy and could not get over the mountains into the Panjshir.
It was freezing cold. We're like 15,000 feet, fully loaded with cargo and people, snow-capped mountains. You know, 3 or 4 of us are all sharing an oxygen line together, passing it back and forth.
Yeah, it was pretty rough.
5 other CIA teams are inserted across Afghanistan in Mazar-e Sharif, Herat, Taloqan, near Kandahar in the south. The biggest will be led by Berntsen. It's not the first time he's worked in Afghanistan, but this time it's personal.
When 11 September happened, where large numbers of the people that died were from Long Island, where I grew up, and I was in Afghanistan to sort of strike back, if not just for the country, at least for people from New York. And this is the first time that I had been deployed on a particular mission where our job was to eliminate large numbers of terrorists. That was what was very, very different about this.
A veteran of covert missions in Afghanistan, Berntsen rekindles old friendships and moves into the compound set up by his predecessor.
When I arrived and I got off the helicopter, you know, a large number of the individuals, some of them drivers, some of them cooks, they all knew me. They all came over, gave me a big hug, because when I was there the first time, I was the only member of the group that could speak Dari/Farsi, and I had a strong relationship with a lot of these men. And so it was like I hadn't missed a beat. It was like I hadn't been gone almost.
With Berntsen in place, Washington gives the all-clear for the full-scale bombing campaign. A whole new chapter in U.S. warfare had begun.
This is not the way the U.S. military had waged war. This was entirely unprecedented. The Pentagon had no military plan to engage al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. So the CIA, based on intelligence collected over the years, based on its networks, provided the plan for the engagement into Afghanistan.
Berntsen sends the Special Forces teams out to the front lines, and they bring with them a powerful weapon. The Special Operations Forces laser marker, SOFLAM. The SOFLAM fires an invisible laser at its target, al-Qaeda's safe houses, Taliban trenches, training camps, and convoys. Overhead, unmanned Predator drones and B-52 pilots buzz the skies, waiting for the signal. Once the bombs lock onto the laser, they follow it down to the target.
You can light up a target with a laser to pinpoint exactly where that bomb needs to go. And this technology becomes invariably important.
Without those Special Forces teams right on the front line using lasers and lighting up the enemy and calling in airstrikes, they would have overwhelmed us. We would not have survived.
Most powerful of all is the Blue 82, nicknamed the Daisy Cutter. Originally designed to clear landing pads in Vietnam, these explosives are too massive to hang from the wing of a plane. Instead, the bombs are rolled out the back of an MC-130 from over 60,000 feet. A 38-inch extender fuse triggers the explosion before the bulk of the bomb hits the ground. The resulting force is 1,000 pounds of pressure per square inch over a range of 900 feet. It inflicts massive internal injuries on any survivors and finishes them off by sucking all oxygen out of the air. The bombing campaign intensifies, and Berntsen and his men move to Bagram Air Base, closer to the capital, Kabul. As the bombing moves closer to the city, the targeting grows more precise.
In the city, they're using munitions that are controlled to specific GPS coordinates. And it's really critical for us that we pinpoint all of these things because we don't want to kill any civilians.
The CIA-led airstrikes wipe out thousands more al-Qaeda soldiers, and the ground assault takes the Taliban by surprise.
We knew from intelligence that al-Qaeda and the Taliban thought the U.S. would either lob some cruise missiles in, or more likely they thought we would take months and months to build up U.S. forces in neighboring countries and then have an invasion. The last thing they would have expected is, in fact, what we did. Small groups behind enemy lines, to work with local allies and to engage in subversion and sabotage and then direct a massive, precise air campaign.
One by one, the Taliban strongholds collapse, and on November 13th, they give up on their capital.
In mid-November, when the bombing gets very, very intense, both on the front lines in the capital, they recognize they can't survive this and flee the city.
Burnson and his team make the treacherous journey into Kabul, and special forces begin to sweep through the city. From street to street, there is no sign of the Taliban.
We're expecting kind of a fight. I'm expecting the Taliban to leave people behind and anticipate that we'll be fighting street to street for a couple of days, but that doesn't occur. We go right in, the city is secure, and the Taliban had fled the city completely.
The Taliban are gone, but in their hurried escape, they leave behind safe houses, training compounds, and an intelligence bonanza. Training manuals, munitions, cell phones, plans for another deadly attack on Western targets.
We were concerned that they were doing bio-weapons, chemical weapons, anything they could have been doing. We were trying to find those facilities right away before they were lost or destroyed.
As CIA translators read through thousands of documents, they discover instruction manuals for improvised explosives and chemical bombs. They even find documents describing bin Laden's ultimate goal: to obtain nuclear weapons.
The intelligence collected by the CIA teams in Afghanistan after 9/11 was truly breathtaking in both its scope and its impact for the CIA, for the U.S. military, and for the National Command Authority to make decisions about where to go next.
Across much of Afghanistan, the Taliban has all but disappeared. Largely confined to the south, their draconian laws are no longer enforced. And the newly liberated population cautiously revels in activities long forbidden: music, movies, and traditional kite flying. But despite the celebration, the CIA's work is far from over. Osama bin Laden is still on the loose, and intelligence reports put him on the road to a mountainous, lawless region in the Black Dust Mountains of Tora Bora. The next phase of the war will be the most dangerous yet. A high-altitude battle to catch bin Laden before he escapes across the border to Pakistan. November 2001. Across most of Afghanistan, the CIA-orchestrated bombing campaign drives the Taliban out of the cities. The CIA, U.S. Special Forces, and Northern Alliance troops have swept Kabul, combing through bombed-out Taliban targets for anything the enemy has left behind.
The city is seized. We grab a facility, like a large guest house area that we set up our operation in, and then immediately, as soon as we do that, I'm looking for bin Laden.
For the Taliban, the war for Afghanistan is over. Less than 90 days after 9/11, they've been pushed from power, and over 10,000 Taliban soldiers are dead.
You only had 110 CIA officers on the ground and approximately 300 special forces. So 410 Americans total, and the Taliban had been routed. 25% of al-Qaeda leadership had been killed. More than 20 different al-Qaeda facilities had been captured. We were going through the exploitation of intelligence that led to arrest in Pakistan and really around the world.
The cities are free, but new intelligence has bin Laden setting up camp in the Black Dust Mountains of Tora Bora near the border of Pakistan. And here, bin Laden is right at home.
He was fleeing to an area he knew, an area that was high in altitude, that was isolated, and provided him a level of defense and time to escape.
Every minute, bin Laden is slipping deeper and deeper into a porous borderland. Burnson knows there's no time to waste.
I decided I was going to assemble my own team and then pursue into the south. So I began talking to my men, and we decided we would send a team into Jalalabad.
Bernson's Jalalabad team is dubbed Jawbreaker Juliet. Behind them arrives a Special Forces team headed by a 20-year Army veteran and Delta Force operator who protects his identity behind the name Dalton Fury.
Delta Force came in there to do high-value target hunting, and so I was specifically asked if I wanted to go after Osama bin Laden or if I wanted to go after Mullah Muhammad Omar, the Taliban leader. With some consultation with my senior sergeants, we decided to go after Osama bin Laden. We received the orders there to kill bin Laden and the unofficial order to bring back proof.
The CIA Special Forces team begins the chase, deep into a mountainous, lawless region where tribal alliance outweighs national allegiance. If bin Laden and his forces reach Pakistan, there will be little chance of finding him.
The Taliban were still operating in company-sized formations, 120 guys. Large numbers of Al-Qaeda there. It was very, very risky, but I sent them in anyway because I thought this is my only chance.
As they make their way towards Tora Bora, Gary Bernson's team track bin Laden's movements and follow him up the steep, tortured landscape. At 11,000 feet, they find what they're looking for. A nest of hundreds of Al-Qaeda soldiers, and they're prepared for a long fight.
Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were separated in the valleys and the ridge lines. Prepare positions, caves, bunkers, trench lines, well stocked for the winter, enormous amounts of ammunition still inside the crates, food, water, dozens and dozens of AK-47s, SAM missiles, rocket propelled grenades, you name it, they had it up in the Tora Bora Mountains.
Team Juliet radios in the coordinates and lights up the target. Soon, U.S. planes unleash a storm of bombs. The camp is obliterated, but did the planes arrive before bin Laden got away?
By the time you get this intelligence, and by the time it gets back to the bombers and the gunships, and then you fly it into theater and you get it over the target spot, you're talking hours and hours have gone by. So is there a possibility bin Laden left after the information was passed? Absolutely. Bin Laden hadn't survived this long by being stupid.
In the aftermath of one airstrike, team members dig through everything left behind. Manuals, weapons, pocket litter from dead soldiers. Then one team member makes a stunning discovery.
We had picked up a radio on the battlefield and literally had CIA's #1 Arabic translator there listening, and who knew bin Laden's voice. He had listened to bin Laden's voice 50, 60 times before and was able to say, yeah, it's him. So he hears him praying, he hears him apologizing to his men that they had been trapped there, that they had been losing their lives. And it sounds like bin Laden expects that he's going to lose his life.
Now, Dalton Fury's team will make the final push to capture and kill the world's most wanted man.
The footing in the mountains of Tora Bora is very unsure. It's very rugged. You're talking about terrain anywhere from 4,000 feet at the base up to 10,000 in the battlefield area. You could take a step on a rock and it would give way. And worried about stepping on landmines, it's a severe strain on the body.
This is an area where it is very, very jagged, rough terrain, and they're going up into these mountains in search of a superior force that is more than 100 times their size.
With U.S. and coalition forces closing in, Osama bin Laden is constantly on the move. He suspects the CIA is tracking his movements by following his satellite phone. And he's right. In early December, the CIA detects bin Laden's sat phone moving out of the area. Ground forces follow the signal to intercept him. It's a decoy. In the truck is bin Laden's Moroccan bodyguard, who's carrying bin Laden's phone to throw U.S. troops off his trail. His suspicions confirmed. Bin Laden will now rely only on human intelligence and swears off the use of traceable technology. Now relying on word-of-mouth reports of Bin Laden's location, Dalton Fury's Delta Force team continues the chase deep into Tora Bora.
You're carrying water, you're carrying ammunition, and you're carrying radios with batteries, because your lifeline up in the mountains of Tora Bora is to be able to speak to the bombers and fighters above you. So as soon as you can get under glass, under binoculars, and see them, spot the cave, see them moving around outside the cave, that's when it's time to call on the bomber.
Many of the planes circling the skies are unmanned bombers, developed and pioneered not by the Air Force, but by the CIA.
Unmanned aerial systems can position themselves over a particular area and just circle for hours and hours. So theoretically, you can have 24 hours surveillance over a particular area or a particular individual. And after 9/11, the CIA was uniquely positioned to use these unmanned aerial systems.
The bombers unleash everything they have on Tora Bora, including the new bunker blasters. 5,000-pound laser-guided bombs that bury themselves in the earth before exploding.
You're looking through your binoculars, you see a particular point, you take out your laser rangefinder, you put the laser on that spot, you read the data off the device, and you send that data up to the fighters, the bombers up in the air.
Cave after cave collapses on the fighters, bringing carnage on a scale Al-Qaeda never saw coming. The sheer force of the firepower pushes Bin Laden's troops even deeper into the mountains. From monitoring Al-Qaeda radio transmissions, the team can tell Bin Laden knows the end is near.
When we first arrived, Bin Laden was very upbeat, very motivated, very confident and sure of himself. As we went along, his radio transmissions were under duress. It gave the impression of the radio that he felt things were starting to slip away.
Moving deeper into enemy territory requires the help of local warlords, and the fighters of the Northern Alliance are foreigners here in the East. Winning over new allies in this tight-knit tribal region in the holy month of Ramadan isn't easy.
I'd say 95% of them didn't even know what 9/11 was, and now you want them to go up and kill a fellow Muslim who happens to be Al-Qaeda, who happens to be working for Osama bin Laden, who has probably financed your family for the last 10 years and is a hero in the area. And the only incentive that you can give them is money.
On December 11th, Fury's team receives reliable intel that Bin Laden's camp is within a few hours' reach. They prepare to head up to the site and call in the bombers to finish the war. But suddenly, their Afghan allies make a stunning announcement. Bin Laden wants to negotiate a surrender.
I received a phone call from my team forward there that Bin Laden had sent someone out to speak with one of the three commanders there, and that they wanted to have a negotiation. They wanted the United Nations to come in. I stated absolutely not. I wanted to break any possible truce between the Afghans and Al-Qaeda instantly, because that would be time that he would use to escape.
The Delta team prepares to move in, but the Afghan allies suddenly turn their weapons on the Americans. At the most critical point in the battle, the Eastern Alliance is playing both sides.
Roughly 70 Mujahideen raised their rifles at the Delta operators and told them, don't go any further, or they'll engage. Now, probably a fair fight when you got 25 well-trained Delta operators against 70 unskilled Mujahideen. However, these were allies, so the last thing the Delta operators at that time could do was engage their allies.
The next day, as expected, there is no surrender. For Burnson and the Jawbreaker team in Tora Bora, it's becoming clear that the money and weapons they've supplied to the Eastern Alliance can't erase long-held tribal ties and a local reverence for the target of the war. Killing Bin Laden would make someone a hero in the West, but here in the heavily tribal Pashtun region, it's a stigma no one wants to carry.
That incentive was not there for the Eastern Alliance to kill Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. He's a hero to everybody there. They name their kids after him. He finances families throughout the area. But we paid the Eastern Alliance opposition group with money and hardware the same way we paid the Northern Alliance with money and hardware, and we expected the same in return.
With the local allies unwilling to finish the deal, the CIA teams need American troops on the ground if they're going to block bin Laden's escape routes. Bernsen radios Central Command and requests 800 Army Rangers be positioned along the Pakistan border to intercept him. His request is denied.
Gary Bernsen's request to me for additional forces was crystal clear. I informed my leadership in Central Intelligence. I informed Central Command, and the President asked me, did we have sufficient force around Tora Bora? And my answer was no.
Instead, the White House decides to rely on Pakistan to intercept al-Qaeda on the border.
The White House makes the decision to go with the Pakistani Frontier Force to cover the backside. The Frontier Force had worked with the Taliban in cooling artillery on the Northern Lights. They weren't a reliable organization.
With Central Command refusing to station troops along the border, the only real chance of hitting bin Laden is with airstrikes, if they could just pinpoint his location. Then, on December 15th, they get their chance. High in the mountains of Tora Bora, spotters locate bin Laden at an al-Qaeda cave. They immediately call in airstrikes. For 3 hours, the bombers blast the site.
We saw him move into the cave, and we brought all those bombers in and dropped the cage. At the time when we left the battlefield Tora Bora, we believed that he was buried in that cave.
Bin Laden was not killed in the airstrike. Later reports would confirm that sometime before December 16th, Osama bin Laden escaped the most powerful military machine on Earth and disappeared across the border into Pakistan.
The first part of the conflict went very well, but at that very end, at that final piece, when you have to get down to the final, most difficult part, we needed our people. And that's why I was arguing for a larger force. The decisions the military made, you have to live with them. I did everything I could using the tools that I had to put us in a position to have success on that. And that's it.
In less than 2 months, the CIA-led war had wrested control of the country from the Taliban and defeated an army of over 60,000 soldiers. But in the years since, Afghanistan has again become a battleground as the Taliban make a defiant comeback.
The war in Afghanistan is unfinished. We, not just the U.S., but the international community, failed in securing that victory. We failed because we did not come in with the equivalent of a Marshall Plan. We did not give them the economic opportunities that they needed.
At the end of the mission, bin Laden got away. But the CIA's Jawbreaker model has forever changed the way the U.S. wages war. It's a new battlefield of intelligence-driven warfare, and the battle is far from over.
For a kinetic strike to take out bin Laden, it's going to be driven by intel. And whether that's human intelligence of someone getting away from him in a timely manner to pass information to someone, CIA, or an ally friend who can pass it to the CIA, for us to get a Predator drone that's armed overhead and strike their position, it's going to require intelligence.
I think it's important that we nullify enemy leadership, get bin Laden. It's important. There's 3 strategic objectives in this type of conflict: nullification of enemy leadership, denial of enemy safe haven, and addressing those conditions the enemy exploits.